If your goal is to get a few more customers, using Instagram, creating content the way that most people do it is a gloriously inefficient way to achieve your goal. And it's the reason why a lot of people are suffering and frustrated. What I'm sharing with you today are the 3 things that I would do to get local clients. Now, this is an excerpt from the Find Your Strong podcast. I encourage you to check out the whole thing, but I wanted to pick out this excerpt because it shows the 3 things that I would do to get clients if I were to start today. None of these have anything to do with me pointing at words in space like a dancing monkey. I have not demonstrated a single exercise. I haven't actually created a single piece of content online in a way that you conventionally think about. And so I really, really hope that you listen to this episode, and whether you do these exact things, whether you do all these things, or whether you pick and choose maybe one of them, or at least use this as inspiration to perhaps think about how there are other ways to generate business than just creating content the way that most people think about it online. I really do hope that this snippet helps, and I hope that you take action. Thanks for listening.
What is your thoughts on somebody who might just be starting out as a trainer? Either they're on the gym floor, they're on or they started out online, and they are trying to get clients through social media right away, and Instagram in particular. What would you say to them? And they're having a hard time finding those clients.
I mean, you're having a hard time because you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Where do I begin here?
Because that's what most people are doing now, right?
Just because social media exists, just because it's in your face, does not mean that it's important. Presence does not equate to importance. Just because you see it, just because you see a follower count go up or down or whatever, doesn't mean it means a fucking thing. But it's hard to get away from that because that's probably what you're looking at all the time. I mean, I got a message from somebody last week, and he was like, "Hey man, I need to get a few more clients. Can you help me? Like, how do I increase my following so I get a few more clients?" And I look at his Instagram, and he's got like 2,500 followers or something like that. And I messaged him. I was like, "Oh, how many clients do you have now?" It's like 3. It's like, you have 2,500 followers. You have 3 clients. You need 10. Do you really think going from 2,500 to 5,000 followers is going to make any goddamn difference? Like, clearly your issue here is not like, what's your conversion rate on that? 3 divided by 2,500. Clearly your issue here is that what you are doing is not actually creating the value that you need to create in order to convert people to clients. And so increasing the numbers is the easy thing that people look at to say, oh, that must be the problem, but it's not. And so I believe very strongly in saying, okay, well, let's work backwards, right? What is my desired outcome? And so I use the example all the time. I live in just outside of Toronto in Etobicoke. You obviously know it. People listening might not. It's a suburb outside of Toronto. And if I were to build a personal training business where I live right now, here's exactly what I would do. There's 3 things. I might not do all 3 of them, but here's the 3 things that I would choose from. Because my goal is to build, basically, I want the wealthy, connected people in this network, in this community, to look at me as the fitness expert. I don't care who's out there in the world. $200 is $200 is $200. I don't care if I get it from somebody who's next door from me or somebody who lives in Uganda. Money counts the same.
Yeah.
And I would rather, this is kind of me personally, but I would rather make an impact locally than make an impact internationally. I want to work on what's inside my fence before I start working on what's outside my fence. Now, ultimately, I want to make the biggest impact possible, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So here's what I would do. It's 3 things. Number 1 is I would join the Township of Islington Business Improvement Association. And I would volunteer at all of their events. because that would be a really easy way to meet all of the business owners who live in the township of Islington. I would volunteer at their events. I would try to champion events like garbage cleanups and stuff like that. That's number one. Number two, I would create a podcast. Now, when people think about social media and podcasts and stuff like that, they think about how to get as many listeners as possible. I don't give a shit about trying to get somebody to listen to my podcast about fat loss somewhere else in the world. So what I would do is I would start a podcast that would be called The Best of Etobicoke, where I interview the trailblazers, the business leaders, thrusting the township of Etobicoke into the 21st century. Because what that would allow me to do now is I would be able to call up the CEOs of every single company that live in Etobicoke and call them up and get them on, like probably to meet with me in person, to be honest, personally, to have a one-on-one conversation. Now, this is not a fitness podcast, right? This is an Etobicoke podcast. This is a local podcast. I just happen to be a gym owner or a personal trainer or whatever it is who lives in Etobicoke. Because what that would be doing, like what you and I are doing right now, having a one-on-one conversation eye to eye for an hour, is probably a more in-depth focused conversation than that person has with anybody else that month, like including their spouse.
That's true.
The relationship that you will build with them over the course of that. And then what you do is that person now feels really special. So they're going to share their podcast with their network. Mm-hmm. You ask them if they know any other business owners. They introduce you to the other business owners in the network. Then you start doing like breakfasts and stuff like that, where you're actually connecting the business owners of your community with one another. And I'm telling you right now, if all you did was this podcast, I'd rather have 100 listeners of business owners, of wealthy business owners who live in Etobicoke, than 50,000 people who are kind of interested in fat loss who live somewhere in the world.
That's smart.
Like think about the value of it. I'll tell you an example from my life. And so Instagram. I was called in. A friend of mine, Eric, runs he's the director of personal training for Good Life. Yeah. Good Life runs 75% of personal training in Canada. And he asked me to come in and speak to their district managers when they had the CanFit Pro conference. All the district managers were in town. So these like 15, 16 people, 17 people run basically 75% of personal training in Canada, right? Asked to speak to them about personal branding and marketing and stuff like that. So I went in and talked to them. And we had he asked me like 2 days before. So it was just like this. It was just like, yeah, let's just rap about this stuff and talk about this stuff. And afterwards I went and sat down beside while Eric kind of finished up, for the day. And one of the women who's the district manager just shows me a phone. She's like, hey, look at this. And on her phone was her Instagram and a message. And it was a facility manager that she manages forwarding her a post of mine the day before.
Cool. Wow.
You didn't know who I was, right? Forwarding her a post of mine the day before, saying, hey, you got to check this out. And I think all of the trainers could benefit from this. Now, think about what happened, because that post was a pretty nuanced post that I wrote about personal trainers and programming. Mm. It did not perform well on Instagram in terms of superficial engagement. It did not get a lot of likes, did not get a lot of shares, whatever it is. This facility manager sending it to his district manager, I don't even know if that registers as a share on my data. Even if it does, it's one share, but a share is not a share, is not a share, is not a share. This was a share from a facility manager of a gym to a district manager of multiple gyms saying, hey, you got to show this to all of your trainers and get them to follow this guy.
That's awesome.
Think about the value of that.
Yeah.
Compared with just me pointing at words and space, trying to be a dancing monkey for likes. Yeah. And so there's the podcast. And then the third thing that I do, if I lived in this neighborhood, is I pound the pavement. This is a lost art. Shake hands, talk to people in real life. I would go to every single gym or every single small business, and I'd walk in and I'd introduce myself. Like, hey, what's going on? I'm John. Look, I'm a trainer, just moving down the street. Just wanted to get to know you. Oh, hey, Jen, what's going on? Ask you a couple questions, Oh, you got a family? Oh, you from here? Whatever it is. And I would have a notebook. And once we're done talking, I'd walk out of your store and I write down in my notebook, Jen, like, what are you, like 7'3"? You know, right?
Two
Married,
kids. Yeah.
married,
He
two
would,
boys, like any
like a
identifying
profile.
stuff.
Mhm.
I'd write a profile, then I'd walk into the next store and do the same thing and the same thing and
That's
the same thing.
awesome.
And I'd go into these stores every 2 or 3 weeks and just say hi to who's in there. And before I'd go into the store, I'd look up their thing and remember their name and remember their kids' names. And, oh, you got a bat mitzvah coming up or whatever it is, right? And I can tell you right now that, to be honest, even if I did one of those things, I'd probably be full within 3 months. If I did all three of those things, I'd be opening up my own gym and hiring other trainers and filling them up within 6 months. Because the bar is set so low for like actual human connection and like community outreach and engagement and like real human shit, the unscalable stuff. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but I have yet to teach a single squat poorly online.